On the last Cup Car 2.0 update, I shared with you guys the process for enclosing the cockpit and building a roof I thought would be fitting for this project. Now after a few weeks of racing in the rig, and with time running short before I have to pause the build and relocate the race room, there's 4 key upgrades I want to make, and number 4, if it works, could change things for the sim racing community forever. Okay, so that might be a little dramatic, but it's going to be huge for those who want a customized approach to at least one element of immersive sim rig builds. Now before we get into the build, the channel just hit 4,000 subscribers as I was preparing to start this video. Hitting 5K would be a huge milestone for the channel and unlock access to something I've been itching to get my hands on. So thank you to those who have continued to support the channel, and if you're not already subscribed, make sure you hit that button before we reach 5K. Now let's get into the build. Now you guys may have noticed at the end of the last video, the trim on the roof was looking pretty rough with the suede wrapped around it, and it just looked really unfinished. And at this point, I'm really starting to think about aesthetics because I don't want the rig to be an eyesore in the new race room once I get it remodeled. So I've been using a forged carbon print bed to print some trim pieces to go around the rig, and as you can see, they're super thin, very lightweight, and they're just intended to give it a nice finished look. So let me show you guys how that's come out. Now I've been printing these panels as I have an opportunity and as the printer's available, but as you guys can see, it's making a huge difference in the overall finish of the sim rig. Not every part of it's perfect because I have to print them in sections and there's going to be some weird gaps and spots in it, but overall I think it looks a whole lot better than it did in the last video. Then of course there's the issue of the exposed foam in the light boxes, which looked awful. So I jumped into Blender and started working through those issues as well, just designing some simple light boxes with a little bit of trim and printing them on the same forged carbon print bed. To make these boxes, I just started with a simple box the size I needed, and then I created a slightly smaller box and used a bouillon modifier to cut the hole out, added a little bit of trim, and then sent it to the printer. And here's how it came out. So you guys can see it's got a forged carbon appearance that'll be facing down towards the bottom of the rig, so when you look up it actually looks nice and clean. Then it's got this nice thick trim to go up inside the foam and hide that. Overall, super thin, really easy to make, and I basically just had to print a second one of these for the other light and then design one larger box exactly the same way so that I could put that one up into the big main light. Now with all the trim installed, we can move on to something a little more functional. Since I'm all about building this sim rig to be as immersive as possible, I don't want anything like black boxes or other race data on screen that could ruin the immersion. And obviously, having an enclosed roof doesn't really give me an opportunity to put a monitor up above that I can use for the information I need. So the most logical solution I could think of was to get a 6-inch Vocore screen, build it a housing, and mount it to the roof. If you already have a 3D printer and some filament, this thing could be built for around $100, so it's relatively cheap for a 4th monitor. All you really need to get is the Vocore screen, a USB cable, and a USB panel mount. And once you have all the parts printed, it takes almost no time at all to assemble it. The beauty of the Vocore screen is that it only requires a single USB connection to power it. You don't have to take up an HDMI or a display port. You can just plug it in via USB, and it's fully compatible with SimHub and can be programmed to display any information you need that SimHub has access to. For me, the screen was mainly so I could see who's in front and behind me and see the split times. But I also went ahead and included the track map on there just in case I want to see where the little dots are. And since I used 2-inch thick foam insulation for the roof, it actually made for a really solid mounting point. All I had to do was poke a few holes through, run some bolts in, put a washer on, and it mounted up real nice and snug without any chance of it coming loose. Now you guys might have noticed throughout that segment that the Vocore screen wasn't the only thing I added to the roof. See, I also have a streaming PC that I do most of my recording on. It controls all the audio, lighting, and cameras for the entire race room. So you can see how having access to that streaming PC from inside the sim rig would be super essential. So putting that stream deck in, having it connected to the streaming PC, huge win for being able to make content and just jump in and control all the lighting, change the audio if I need to, mute the mics, and even be able to start recording when I need to rather than having to cut a bunch of excess off of the videos. Both the Vocore screen and the Stream Deck were things that I knew I needed to incorporate somewhere in the rig from the get-go, but I didn't really know where I was going to put them, and because of how I want to construct the rest of the dash, there wasn't really going to be any space to make them work down below, so mounting them up to the roof kind of made the most sense. So I moved pretty quickly through those first 3 upgrades because I wanted to leave plenty of time to get into the fourth upgrade in extreme detail, because I think it's the one you guys are probably going to be most likely to use. See, earlier this week I wanted to put out my first POV video inside of the sim rig, just so I could get an opportunity to see how everything feels and how it looks and how immersive everything is. And one thing that really stood out to me in the video is that the racing nets just almost look non-existent. They're not exciting, they're not a feature part of the rig, and honestly, I feel like racing nets should be. Now, I've lost track of how many different sim racing nets I've built over the years, either because I made an adjustment on the sim rig and the net was too long or too short, or I wanted to change the color, or I wanted to change the way it connected. All these different things have led to me coming up with the last racing net I'll ever have to build. If this works, it'll be completely modular, which will allow you to change out the nets to different colors and stuff super easily, without any sewing whatsoever in the entire project. And it all starts with this piece right here, which I am going to reprint with a lot better quality using a metallic silk, but I wanted to get a test run out of the way. So this is the main connect for the nets. And as you can see, rather than sewing it, I've created a spot to put a couple screws into that holds it in place, and it is super snug and solid. And then each of the nets will come off of these points in the same manner. And to connect all the nets together, I came up with these. There's two different versions. One's a 4-way, so it'll go in the middle strap on the net. And then one's a 3-way that'll go on the tops and bottoms of the net to hold everything together with one single screw per connection. So rather than having to sew, it'll just be one single bolt to solve that problem. And to connect it to the sim rig, I've got this coupling right here. The strap will come up through this hole and feed right under this clamp right here, allowing me to have a little bit of excess off of there in case I need to make any adjustments in the future. So let's get it put together and see if it actually works. So as you guys can see, I have printed a final version of the net connector. First off, I started by attaching one of the red nylon straps, and that's because when I started with the black one on the black sample piece, ultimately what I found out was the black nylon was super pliable and easy to get the screws through. The red one, on the other hand, requires a lot of effort to poke holes, burn, maybe even a razor blade at times to open up the holes a little more, because it's a lot stronger material and it's a lot harder to drive the screws through the middle of it. But as you can see, with a lot of manipulation, it eventually went in. And the truth is, this was supposed to be a simple modular design, and by the end of this, you're going to realize that there are some flaws in that. Next comes what I thought would be the most daunting task of trying to get the net connected to the coupler, which ultimately I figured out that if I take the pick and mark the holes and then cut them open with a razor blade, I can take the mounting plate, pre-mount the screws, and just wrap the net around the screws and put them in place, and it worked pretty well. So in that respect, mounting the net to the coupler was actually pretty quick and easy. Where this whole project fell apart completely was coming down to the spot that would normally be notorious for being sewn into nice square blocks and look amazing. And I chose to use these black connectors thinking that I'd be able to get holes all the way through and drive screws through it, making it quick. Unfortunately, I designed the whole thing before realizing how hard it was going to be to get these holes made. And in the end, I ended up just taking a needle and thread and running it through there and tying a knot in it basically and melting it down just to get it to hold in place. Now, were I to start this whole project over again, this section I would choose to sew for sure. That being said, I still love the way it connects to the coupling and the net connection section. Like, those two pieces came together really well. It was worth the effort put in to make them connect because I think it looks really clean and looks really good. But as far as trying to make this work in the middle sections where it should be sewn into square blocks, next time I would just sew them into square blocks, and I very well may take this whole thing apart and do that at some point. All in, I've been pretty happy with the progress since my last update on the build. I think the roof trim looks phenomenal. Like, just adding that around the top of the roof is definitely classing it up a whole lot. I love having the monitor in the roof now and being able to get access to that extra data that I was missing from not having the black box. And of course, having full control over all my cameras and audio and everything that the Stream Deck controls right at my fingertips, rather than having to get out of the rig and touch buttons, is just huge for making content. And the racing nets, in my opinion, the racing nets I think are going to look really good on video, and there's some good aspects of it. But in terms of what I set out to do with those, I would say that's the first full-blown fail for Cup Car 2.0. It didn't work the way I planned for it. It wasn't worth the effort of designing and printing the little connectors in between the nets when I should have just sewed them. I love the main net connection and of course the coupling. I think all that came together really well and those were great solutions. A little bit tedious, but still worth the effort. As far as the other parts, just definitely missed the mark. If you guys do want access to the STL files for any of this stuff, I am going to be uploading them before this video goes live, so it will be available right when you guys see this. Just go into the description, join the channel membership, and channel members have access to all the STL files for this build. On next week's video, I'm going to be pitting the Cup Car 2.0 build up against the Pimax VR headset and see how immersive this triple screen setup really is. That's likely going to be my last YouTube video before starting on the new race room remodel, so make sure you guys check it out. Also, if you haven't checked out the sponsors for Cup Car 2.0, there's affiliate links down in the description if you're shopping for anything sim racing related. Make sure you look at it. There's special discounts in there for a lot of different stuff. So make sure you guys hit that subscribe button, ring the bell, and until next week, I'll see you guys out on the track.